Vamos con las negras. All right, we're going to play e5. Let's play e5. Okay, so we're facing a Scotch. We're facing a Scotch, and if he takes on d4, it'll be a Scotch gambit. Otherwise, it'll be a Italian Scotch, or sorry, regular Scotch that we have to take. A Scotch in Spain. That almost doesn't make any sense. Yeah, so now white has this big choice between bishop c4, that's the Scotch gambit, and then knight takes d4 is the traditional Scotch. Okay, knight takes d4. If you're an e5 player, there's like a million ways to face the Scotch. The two main moves are bishop c5 and knight f6. My main move is bishop c5 and has been for the past few years. And here, those of you who are theory experts should know that black has this move queen f6, or if you've seen Charlie against XQC, I actually feel like taking straight away is perfectly good enough, and not enough people do it. And then there's a very interesting system that I'm going to play if he plays knight c3, which is the main move. But a lot of people don't even realize that black can simply take back on c6. Okay, so we're already playing in 2000. Bishop c4. Bishop c4. So he develops the bishop first. That's kind of an interesting move. Now, there are different ways that black can position their pieces. Obviously, one of them is you can just play d6. You can put your queen on f6 and then play knight e7. There are like several options on the menu. There's also queen h4. You can play queen h4, and then if white castles, you can quickly get the knight out to f6 and try to get to g4. So let's see what happens if we play super aggressively. Let's throw in queen h4. But the point is that after white castles, we shouldn't take the pawn on e4. Because if we take that pawn, we get pinned, rook e1. So the point of queen h4 isn't to win the pawn on e4, although if white doesn't castle, we will. The point is to quickly get the knight to f6 and then to threaten knight g4. And you should be familiar with this construction, queen on h4, knight on g4, bishop on this diagonal. And our opponent is probably familiar with this, but one second. So wait, what happens if we play knight g4? If we play knight g4, white plays knight f3. We play knight takes f2. Wow, there's actually some crazy tactics there. Let me think. Knight g4, knight f3, knight takes f2. So we're attacking white's queen, white's attacking our queen. No clue what's going on there. But we can also just castle. We don't have to play knight g4. We can also just castle. So after the game, I'll explain some of the complications to y'all. But let's just castle, because now we're threatening knight g4 in earnest. And if white plays knight f3, we can already take the pawn on e4. So this is actually a very tricky move, yeah. So our opponent gives us the center pawn. I don't know if he has something in mind. I think this is just a blunder. And now we have an extra pawn. And now our last remaining priority for the opening is to get this bishop out of the gates. The bishop on c8 is currently hemmed in by our pawns. So we want to play either d6 or d5, depending on what white does. Get this bishop out, and we'll just be a healthy pawn up. Okay, b3. So the only thing that concerns me here is the placement of our queen. I don't want our queen to hang out on e4 for too long, and I'm pretty sure that white is going to attack our queen, and we're going to be forced out of the way. So we should play d5 here. And the reason that I'm not playing d6 is because if you look at the e4 square, currently it's occupied by the queen, but after bishop d3 happens, okay, rook e1. What's going to happen is that we're going to get that square available, and we might be able to put our knight there after the queen moves. Now, where should the queen go? There are several options here. We can go, one interesting thing we can do is we can go back to g6. We can also go a little bit more aggressively, queen g4. I like queen g4 because it's very active, and if white plays h3, we can drop the queen back to h5. I like queen g4 a lot. Okay, h3. So let me think for a second. We actually have several very interesting options. We need to be very careful, because if we go queen h5, there's this move rook e5. Queen g6 is susceptible to all sorts of moves, like knight e5. But knight e5, we have queen f5. So queen g6, bishop d3. Then there's knight e4. There's also queen g3, some of you are noticing. But if we play queen g3, white will play bishop e3. And then we take it. White takes with the rook. We have to move our queen again. And we can move it back to d6. So queen g3 is fine. I'm trying to find something better, so give me a second to think. Just something you occasionally have to do. So I actually like queen g6. And I'll explain this a little bit more after the game, but there's a very concrete line that I'm calculating. What I like about this move is that it also threatens bishop takes h3, which, as you can understand, is a pretty devastating threat. Now you might say, but I don't get it. White can play bishop d3 and we can't take on h3 because our queen is hanging. Well, bishop d3 can be met with knight e4. That's why we played d5. We played d5 to be able to stick a knight on e4. And you might say, but can't white take the knight? But then we take back, we're attacking white's knight, and we're still threatening bishop takes h3. And on top of that, we're threatening the f2 pawn. So despite the knight being pinned, it's still attacking the f2 pawn. Something a lot of people don't understand. A pinned piece isn't necessarily fully immobilized. It can also do something. Now, I think bishop takes e4, I think is a mistake. So we, of course, have to take, and I think our opponent is relying on knight h4, having missed our response to that move. No, knight e5. But now we have many options. And I think the prettiest one is queen g3. Is that the best one? Yeah, it probably also is the best one. We can also play queen f6. Queen f6 is also good, but I think this is very pretty. And I don't see a reason not to play this move. It doesn't win. If white plays accurately, I think white is still okay. Okay is, relatively speaking, okay. White is not losing on the spot. But I think in the end, we're probably going to go 2 pawns up and liquidate into an endgame. If I'm anticipating this correctly, we're eventually going to get an endgame where we're 2 pawns up. Yeah, so here, we should start by taking f2. There's a ton of tactics that I'll explain after the game. So for example, some of you might say, well, can't we play bishop takes h3 here? But white has this move queen f3. A lot of you might be tempted to take on f2 with the queen, but there's a specific reason that I want to take on f2 with the bishop. And the reason is that after king h1, I think we have an additional tactical resource that wins another pawn. So, okay, king f1. So that's a moot point. I wasn't expecting king f1. So what should we do now? We should probably move the bishop away from f2 in order to threaten queen f2 checkmate. A lot of you want to play bishop a6 check, but then white plays c4. So I'm not exactly sure what that gives us, other than a bad bishop. I want to keep this bishop on c8 so that we can sack on h3 if an opportunity arises. But sacking on h3 immediately, as I know a lot of you want to play, I think is a bad idea because white's just going to take that bishop, and we're going to give a scary-looking check on g1. White plays king e2, and I don't think there's a follow-up there. So I actually like the idea of just moving the bishop back to b6 and creating a massive threat of queen f2. Obviously, that's mate. White should defend that probably with queen f3, and there, okay, that is crazy. White succumbs to the pressure. I guess our opponent just lost his patience. Lol. 2000 misses mate. That's pretty crazy. Despite the ending, this was pretty instructive, I think, attacking chess, even if I didn't play too accurately. In this position, the other main move is knight f6. The reason I don't like it as much as bishop c5 is because the main line here is knight takes c6, bc, and then this move e5. I don't know how many of you have seen this before. And then black plays this very weird-looking move, queen e7, pinning the pawn, queen e2, and then knight d5. I wouldn't necessarily say that white played that badly. It was just a bad game. Yeah, and after c4, there's bishop a6. There's a very well-studied theoretical line here. Garry Kasparov has played this a bunch with white. So this is just something that you should know if you want to play knight f6. In my opinion, bishop c5 is a little bit easier to learn and a little bit more structurally sound. But after knight takes c6, all of the books recommend queen f6. This threatens checkmate. And if I remember correctly, the main move here is queen d2. Now you can play both bc and dc, but the main move is dc. And then you get a position like this, which is very interesting. I mean, this is supposed to be equal. But a less studied move is b takes c6. This is a lot more rare than queen f6. Bishop c4 is a move, but I don't think it's great. So in these types of positions, if you're playing white, it's important to realize that the bishop actually belongs on d3 most of the time. Precisely because of what happened in the game. Like, the pawn on e4 is both an asset but also a weakness in many positions. So it's important to defend it preemptively. And if we do the same thing that we did in the game, if we play queen h4, white can further defend the pawn with queen e2. So there are 23 games here that I see, knight f6. Then people actually play h3. And then g3. Oh, and the queen is sort of trapped, so you have to go here. So this just leads to a very complicated position, potentially an endgame. Isn't the double pawn bad? Well, I've talked about that many times. It's not great, but it's not the only factor in the position. And there are other factors in the position which are in black's favor, such as the fact that when we play d5, the c pawns could actually be good. Like the c6 pawn supports the d5 square. So in and of itself, the double pawns don't really tell you much about the position. Yeah, it's a factor that works in white's advantage, but there's a million other things to point out in this position, such as the fact that black has a development advantage, right? We've developed a piece and white hasn't. And that hurt white in this position. Do you ever play a5 in these positions? Well, yeah, you do play a5 sometimes. So the move a5 in such positions can serve primarily two reasons. The first is that it can just grab space on the queen side, which can be good in certain positions. But the main thing a5 often does is it creates the potential of bishop a6. So you can imagine a situation where the bishop is gone and the queen sits on this diagonal. You often see people going a5 and bishop a6 to activate the bishop. You also see this sometimes in the French from the white side. It's always a good idea to understand when ideas exist in various openings. And in the Winauer French, there is a very typical idea, very, very typical idea of playing a4 and bishop a3 to put the bishop on an optimal square. Even after knight e7, which is the main line, one of the main sidelines is a4. This is like a move that's existed forever. Yeah, to answer your question, a5 is definitely a viable idea, but not anytime soon. Okay, so we decided on playing very aggressively. We play queen h4. Now, not queen takes e4, rook e1. That's a classic pin. But the point of putting the queen on h4 is that the queen pressures f2 and h2 at the same time. And knight f6 creates this massive threat of knight g4. If you're new to chess, you should remember this pattern. There are three ingredients to this pattern. You have the classic queen and knight combo, which is scary in and of itself. But the addition of the bishop means that f2 is also going to be hanging if you put the knight on g4. So then the question arises, well, why didn't I do that, right? Why didn't we play knight g4? This looks really, really good. The reason I didn't play it is because of this move, knight d2 to f3. And thank you, Copel and Blaze. And you might say, well, wait a minute. I could just play bishop takes f2 check. But you can't stop calculating here. You've only won a pawn. And notice that you haven't castled, you haven't developed your bishop, and you've also opened up the f file, which could work in white's favor because of the pressure on the f7 pawn. So white moves the king aside. The king is actually very safe on h1. h2 is defended by the knight. So you cannot take on h2. You have to move your queen. It's hanging. Let's say you move it back to h5. And I was not convinced that this position is good for black at all. Just because all of our pieces seem to be suspended in midair. But maybe it is. Maybe this is fine for black. I don't actually see a specific move for white. But maybe something like queen to e2. I don't know. Queen to e2. I guess we just move the bishop back then. But this half-open f file is what worried me. I just didn't see the point. So instead, we decided to very patiently castle, solving the problems of the f file. Now there's nothing to be afraid of because the rook defends f7. And our opponent gave up a pawn. Like, things started going downhill for white here. I already think that white is worse because the bishop is very misplaced. And this is a good illustration of why, in such positions, the bishop belongs on d3. If the bishop is on d3 here, white would play knight f3 with zero problems. With the bishop being on c4, it blunders the pawn and attacks the bishop simultaneously. So I don't really know what white should do here. Maybe queen e2, but then we can already strike with d5, and the bishop comes out to g4. This is a big initiative for black. It also hurts white that the bishop on c1 is blocked by the knight, and as we already established, moving the knight away gives up the pawn. So this is a tough position for white, no question about it. In any case, castles, knight f3, queen takes c4. Yeah, so bishop c4, I think, was a very serious inaccuracy in the opening, actually. So we take the pawn. We go d5, which is a very reasonable move. And now here, the alternative to queen g4 is to drop it back to g6, but I felt like queen g4 is just a more active and aggressive move. Also, queen g6, thank you, Barasedon, allows this weird move, knight h4. Very, very strange move, but it actually forces a queen trade. You know, the funny thing is this exact idea occurs in a very similar position in the Jababa London. The reason I know about this is because in the Jababa London, which I play very often, there is this idea, and let me give you an example of where it arises. So, yeah, so basically something like, yeah, okay, so something like this, where you suddenly play queen at knight a4, and the queen has to move to a5, and that forces a queen trade. In some cases, that actually traps the queen. So we played d5, then we played back to g6. And you might ask, why didn't we play queen g3 here? Because white can't take. The reason is this move, bishop e3. And when you are relying on a pin to save the queen, you have to be very, very careful. Because if the pinned piece is distracted, the queen is automatically hanging. So you're going to end up losing a bunch of tempi. After bishop e3, you can't just take on c4. Your queen is now hanging. And after you take, okay, white can't take the queen at this point, but he can take the bishop back, and again the queen is hanging. And we can drop the queen back to d6, and we're up a pawn, and black is better. But I didn't want to give away my dark squared bishop that easily, and that's why we played queen g6. If white plays knight h4 now, what was my idea? So this is a very important subtlety. Now the knight is undefended. How does that help us? Now we play queen g3, exactly. So just because an idea doesn't work in one position doesn't mean that you reject it overall. Now queen g3 works. What's the difference? The difference is that it's a fork. The knight is now hanging bishop e3. You take the bishop, and now you have queen takes h4 and you're up a piece. So that's actually a very nice trick. After knight e5. Here, again, you don't want to go queen g3 because of bishop e3. And you might say, wait a second, then isn't the knight hanging here too? It is, but you can't capture it. Because if you take it, white takes c5 and it's a discovery. And if you take the bishop first, then the rook takes and it defends the knight. So just concretely, this doesn't work. What should black do here? Where should we go with our queen? Where should we go with our queen? Yeah, you should go to f5. And the point is that now you're attacking f2 from two different directions, and you're attacking the bishop. And again, it's a fork. It's a double attack. So after bishop d3, we stick the knight on e4. How do I know that this pin is not dangerous? Mostly it's because there's a pawn that is defending the knight. And I've talked about this many times on the speedrun. When you have a pawn that is defending a pinned piece, the pin automatically becomes less dangerous. Plus, we're attacking the f2 pawn. Now, white should have certainly gone bishop e3. I think bishop e3 was the last chance for white to stay in the game. But here we can take on e3. And the funny thing is, we actually cannot take on h3. As far as I can tell, this is a bad move. Who can tell me why? Where do beginners go for puzzles after mate in 1? Just go to chess.com/puzzles, and it'll automatically give you easy problems to start, and it'll adjust. Yeah, knight h4. Very common trick. Attacking the bishop, attacking the queen. Very easy to blunder this kind of thing. Okay? Black is still okay. Probably you can play queen f6 and take this pawn. But why give up the piece, right? Why give up the piece? So here I would have probably gone f5, for example, to support the knight. And now we're threatening f4. Position sucks for white. You've got a monster knight, you've up a pawn, and you've got an attack against the king. But still, this would have kept white in the game. After the trade, there are way too many threats. I mean, white is just busted on all of the diagonals. And after knight e5, queen g3, unfortunately, rook takes c4 keeps white more or less in the game. I think king f1 is probably the decisive mistake. What was the idea after king h1? Well, anytime the king is out of squares, you look for tactics, and you should see the move bishop takes h3. If takes, then queen takes h3 is mate. White has this move queen f3, and now we trade queens. We drop our bishop back, and we're up 2 pawns, and we're winning. We're up 2 pawns in an endgame. Yeah, white does offer a trade by playing queen f3. That's the point. Oh, yeah. Why not bishop b3 after queen g3? Because bishop b3, we can take the knight, simultaneously defending the bishop. Don't forget that the knight is also hanging here, so this is a fork. Yeah, so this is a great example of, like, a lot of people would automatically play this move thinking it's mate, but there is c4. Always, when there's a large distance between a checking piece and the king, you should look for ways to block the check. And the bishop is now totally ineffective because of this pawn chain. So we play bishop b6. It's a slow move, but it creates a huge threat. Now, of course, white should have played queen f3, but I think the black has an excellent attacking move here. So ideally, you want to not trade queens. Like, if you trade queens, it's fine. You're still up a pawn. But if you can keep the queens on the board, the king is totally busted. So I really like the move queen h2. What if knight d3 in the position where you fork the f2 pawn and the knight? Well, knight d3, you just take it. There's a pawn on there's still the pawn on e4. So we have this move queen h2, and the queen is infiltrating to g1. The rook is coming out. The bishop is coming out. Okay, white is obviously lost, but perhaps he could have prolonged the game for another couple of moves. Also notice that you can't move the bishop out because this actually just wins the rook in the corner. So, in any case, white blundered mate, so that ended the game quickly. But hopefully you guys enjoyed the game and enjoyed the stream. I'm going to get going. I have a lot to do. Have a good one. See you tomorrow. Bye.